Merci beaucoup et merci à Lynn et tout le monde qui a organisé cette colloque aujourd'hui. Et maintenant, on juste commence. In his evocative text, Listening, Jean-Luc Nancy reflects on those turns of phrase related to the act of listening. What do we really mean when we announce that we are tuned in, when we say something is hearsay, or when we declare, I hear you? Phrases such as these, Nancy surmises, are indicative of what he calls ontological tonality, a term which asks us to consider, quote, what it might mean for a being to be immersed entirely in listening, formed by listening, or in listening, listening with all of her being, end quote. At the heart of Nancy's speculation on ontological tonality is the concept of resonance, or résonance.
Resonance, in Nancy's text, is sound understood as an oscillation of vibrational movements that co-constitute who we are together in the world. Sound is commonly understood as merely vibration, as Jonathan Stern explains, that class of vibrations perceived and in a more exact sense sympathetically produced by the functioning ear when they travel through a medium that can convey changes in pressure such as air. Nancy's idea of resonance complicates this technical definition, blurring the line between entendre as listening and entendre as meaning. Today, we reflect upon resonance in the context of creating meaning in age-related memory loss by putting the concept of resonance into conversation with my sound art piece, Turning, which was a composition that I created from recordings of conversation between myself and my father, Dr. John Morehouse.
In her discussion of working with people living with dementia, Anne Davis Basting emphasizes the import of listening, suggesting that, quote, asking a question and listening to the response, really listening, demands time, focus, attention, and an acknowledgement that the person is worthy of being heard. Listening, really listening, she says, is a lost art, end quote. Further, Basting argues that our society is also in need of stories that, she says, capture the everyday moments that can be deeply meaningful and that focus on the possibility of growth in the midst of an experience that is riddled with loss, end quote. Basting challenges the deeply rooted idea that Alzheimer's disease is, quote, the most frightening condition that faces the aging population in the 21st century, end quote. Indeed, a recent survey of Québécois about aging indicates that a loss of autonomy and a loss of memory are two of the greatest fears associated with the process of aging.
As Toronto-based gerontologist Pia Contos explains, this dread and fear extends beyond the effects of the disease itself. As she states, rather boldly, the Alzheimer's label has come to carry with it a sentence of social death. Memory loss is not just a biomedical problem if we take Contos and Basting seriously. Memory loss, remembering, and forgetting is also a condition that brings into a multitude of regimes of power, knowledge, and discourse within our existing society. And so, let's turn to Turning now.
A 7-minute composition distilled from approximately 8 hours of recorded conversation between Ainsley and her father, who was living with dementia. In these conversations, we hear and get a strong sense of a relationship. We catch glimpses of shared laughter, observations, sadness, idle chatter, periods of silence, and a deeply emotional bond. The conversations were initially recorded in 2011 in the kitchen of her family's home, the place where she grew up, but the piece itself is actually set in the culturally loaded space of a hospital room, which for John had become a sort of home by 2012. As such, it really is a work of fiction.
So I'm going to play the piece now, and I'll invite you if you'd like to close your eyes, but do what you'd like. Itchy eye?
Hmm?
You have an itchy eye?
It'll go away in a minute, I think. That's the sun up there, right?
I think so.
I guess it is, I don't know. Or it's going the wrong, but it's moving that way. Maybe things are turned around.
Oh.
Oh. Boy, it's that's the sun, eh? So it's the clouds moving.
Okay, I'm just gonna empty your bag.
Oh. Huh. Oh well. See, I guess I can blow my nose in this thing.
Here's your soup.
Holy badoodle.
And a bun.
So I just eat this.
Yeah, go right ahead. You know what? Before you eat, I'm just gonna give you a really quick shave. Your whiskers are getting just a little bit long.
Holy mackerel. Return in the sun. How you gonna get your face first sun? And what? Oh, lazy bone, return in the sun. I sort of remember the days of my youth when I used to understand things. So what do I do? Eat this and butter this?
If you'd like, yeah.
So what do I do? Pull this?
Do you get scared when you can't remember things?
Yeah, a little. Not as much as I used to. Like, it's just the way it is, so, I can't do anything about it. I seem to manage a conversation reasonably well. I suppose it'll get worse, and I just don't think about that.
Yeah.
Things are the way they are, and
Papa, I sure hope that you will always remember me.
oh, I will that. I will that.
Good.
Boy. That's the sun, eh? I guess it is. I don't know.
In contemplating what we mean by resonant listening as it relates to rethinking our relation to those othered by dementia, we'd like to draw your attention to 6 elements within the piece.
Listening to silence. Turning begins with silence. Silence, as Nancy says, is not necessarily a privation, but a different arrangement of resonance, as, quote, sense opens up in silence. Silences can be full and active. In the theater, for example, we often speak of a pregnant pause.
Do not fear conversational fragments. Ainsley asks, "Do you have an itchy eye?" John's answer to this query is at first puzzling. John starts speaking about the sun, observing that it appears to be moving in the wrong direction. Yet within this seemingly disjointed response, a moment of lucidity emerges. He states, "Maybe things are turned around." He initially seems confused and appears to have difficulty making sense of the world around him from our point of view. He does not answer to questions directly. Yet his voice, words, and descriptions aren't necessarily panic-stricken, anxiety-ridden. They're observations, gentle, contemplative, exploratory. We're brought into his perceptions of the world from the location of his hospital bed.
The setting matters. In my field notes from the time of recording and of creating this piece, I wrote this. My father often expressed fears of turning into something else. When he explained these fears to me, he had trouble articulating them, but he explicitly referred to bodily changes, to the point of physically morphing into a different being. More than once, he told me that he was worried about turning into a turtle. What was being implied was his sense of a loss of control at the hands of others, as he had very little agency over what happened to his body and when. There was no ceremony in day-to-day life and very little reverence for his body. Turning represents the brutal reality of living with dementia in a modern-day setting. What is presented to us here is troublesome, a force of apprehension. It's the hospital setting, which underscores, as Basting might say, the idea that Alzheimer's is not only a disease of the mind, but also of the environment.
Turning records the harsh interruptions caused by necessary interventions, the tools, drugs, and devices that are meant to help those who are in the latter stages of the disease. Plastic tubes, rubber bags, and EKG monitors mediate John's relationship to the world and are necessary to sustain his life. They assist him, that they're also brutally disruptive. In turning the paradoxes of these technological extensions, the ambivalence felt by Ainsley and John to a situation where the rituals of everyday life, a shave in the morning, a glass of wine in the late afternoon, are gradually overtaken by institutional protocols that mark hospital time and express to the point where shaving and eating happens simultaneously. John, an endocrinologist, is turning from doctor to patient. Reversal of relations. Near the end of the piece, Ainsley utters the question, "Papa, I sure hope you will always remember me," to which John quickly replies with love and fatherly authority, "Oh, I will that, I will." His pacing, his pitch is perfect. It is he who provides her with reassurance. Resonance, remember, is in the tone of his voice. For this brief moment, the relationship has turned. The roles of caregiver and care recipient have flipped. We, the listeners, are made aware of the reciprocity and fluidity within this relationship.
The formation of this strange dialogue is a reminder that in these moments of felt loss, of intense change, in these turnings, that it is we who may be comforted by those who have dementia and memory loss. In every moment, as Basting emphasizes, there is something to be learned, gifts to be exchanged. There is a subtle murmur of partnership that may be experienced if we are listening carefully.
Forget memory. Field notes document how recording and listening led Ainsley to a new understanding of memory loss and personhood, moving her from creating works that would be about her father and instead work that would be with him. She writes,
I had been exploring my experiences with my father's diagnosis of Alzheimer's for years through my theater work, but suddenly I saw an opportunity to engage with my father in this art form, rather than simply about him. The process of working with my father's voice and subsequently researching sound in this way led me to discoveries about memory loss and personhood, and it worked to strengthen and deepen my relationship with my father.
Creating with sounds, with conversations, form the basis from which to make sense of John's experience, his lived presence, to a world open to a plethora of forms of perception, to a different way to understand the articulation between meaning and sense.
Find meaning between the words. Meaning is not merely expressed in the words, but within the voice, between the words. To make the move from being about to engaging with entails, as I have explained, shifting from uncovering meaning to reveling in the communicative interactions derived from paying attention to the resonant qualities in my father's voice and finding solace in his fragments of speech. Timing, movement, pacing render a sense of space and place in combination with the pitch and timbre of these voices' utterings, with judicious care, a few choice words. Listening to the voice as sound brings us into contact with the feared other of dementia by emphasizing the value of being in the present moment, and that is where the meaning lies.
In conclusion, resonance happens somewhere between bodies, in spaces, at moments in time, to create a transformation of the self and of selves. It is, as Nancy writes, quote, an intensive spacing of a rebound that does not end in any return to a self without immediately relaunching as an echo, a call to that same self, end quote. The timbre, the swell of deep emotion, a good hearty laugh. When the focus is no longer on what is being said, but on how it is said, we make resonant connections.
Turning demonstrates how experimental sound making can be used to elicit an empathetic apprehension of our changing corporeal and cognitive capacities and provide an occasion for intimate knowledge sharing across generational and cognitive divides. In this sense, sound becomes a form of mediation in the three ways elaborated by Raymond Williams: as a bridge, as a negotiation, and as materialized form, in this case as a sound composition. Using sound as mediation in this piece promotes listening that is attuned to the voices, musicality, and silences of those who may be stigmatized owing to disease, and within a culture fixated on youth and middle age as the pinnacle of a life's achievement. They focus on inventiveness in the moment rather than dwelling on what has been lost, taking to heart Anne Davis Basting's injunction that we should forget memory and try instead imagination. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for questions.
Hello. So thank you very much for this very interesting talk. I really appreciated the way you approach the issue of communicating with a person with dementia, because we have to remember that communication is much more than language, and that in fact communication is a way of being with the other person. It goes beyond the words you have or you don't have, beyond the memories that the person has or doesn't have, even beyond the logics of what the person is saying or not. It is an attitude. It's a decision, a deliberate decision to be with the other person. And once you get into this kind of space, in fact, any means is a good means of communication, because what you want is to stay with the other person. So anything that the person brings to the field of communication becomes a communication object.
You're choosing to meet the person where they're at, to be with them the way they are and to not try to impose our sense of...
Exactly. Instead of bringing the person where you are, you try just to go where the person is. And I am from the field of communication sciences and disorders, and we are very, how can I say, we sometimes forget that, in fact, as you perfectly well said, the tone of the voice, the pauses, and everything that is nonverbal is sometimes much more meaningful than what we say with words. It can even be the opposite message. So I just wanted to say that I really appreciate it, and I think it's very important not to put the emphasis on what still is there in terms of memory or language or syntax or whatever, but just to decide to be with the other person. And you can have access to lots of very precious moments if you stick to this perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.